Good afternoon. Welcome to our event. Welcome to those online. We actually have people online for this event. Got that squared away. Pleased with that. Welcome to the results event with Governor Charlie Baker and Mr. Steve Kadish. My name is Erwin Morse. I'm the Executive Director for the School of Public and International Affairs, SPIA, which is the home of the Departments of Political Science and Public Administration, our Leadership in the Public Sector program, our Master's in International Studies, and our Public Safety Leadership Initiative. We'll begin with a conversation focused on Governor Baker and Steve's new book, Results: Getting Beyond Politics to Get Important Work Done. We're also joined by moderator Professor Trace Reed. I want to thank you all for being with us. Following the discussion, we'll have time for Q&A, and then Steve and the governor will be available for book signing immediately after the close of the event. Now I'd like to invite Ms. Hannah Braun, Park Scholar, Political Science major, and Hunt intern in the Institute for Emerging Issues, to the podium to introduce the Chancellor. Hannah?
Good evening. My name is Hannah Braun. I'm a senior here at NC State, and like Dr. Morris said, I'm the Hunt intern this year for the Institute for Emerging Issues. Thank you so much for having me. Also, there is so much food, so please help yourself. I know the college students struggle. We're coming off a spring break. Haven't restocked. The cookies are really good, he says. IEI is a public policy organization at NC State University that focuses the state's attention on finding solutions to our most emerging and most critical public issues. As a nonpartisan connector, we bring North Carolinians together across sectors, regions, and perspectives to achieve their vision of North Carolina, where people connect and collaborate to build a vibrant and prosperous future for all. IEI is in our 21st year now serving North Carolina, but our signature event, the Institute for Emerging Issues Forum, precedes us by a couple of decades. The first Emerging Issues Forum was held in 1986 on the topic of how to remain competitive in an increasingly global economy. Since then, we have covered a variety of issue areas, including but not limited to health, education, economic, and environmental issues. Our last forum was in February and focused on growing the state's workforce. In addition to our Emerging Issues Forums, we also have several short and longer-term initiatives that we are involved in to support communities across the state. These include digital inclusion, community networks, and financial resilience. Another way that IEI connects our campus community and beyond is through the Hunt internship. This internship was spearheaded by former Governor Hunt to inspire future public servants. On the left, you can see last year's Hunt intern, Shivani Mehta, speaking with Governor Hunt. As this year's Hunt intern, I've had the opportunity to connect to change makers across the state, attend this year's Farm Aid Festival, and interview community members, and work on Project Resilience, a multi-year initiative dedicated to the financial resilience of North Carolinians. As this semester comes to an end, the search for next year's Hunt intern is on. Applications are open now and close on April 10th, and we welcome any rising juniors or seniors with a passion for public policy or public service to apply. It is now my pleasure to introduce Chancellor Randy Woodson. He told me not to talk too long, but I'm still going to give him a little bit of an introduction. He became Chancellor, the 14th Chancellor of North Carolina State University back in April of 2010, and since then he has led with a special focus on student success, collaborative partnerships, and groundbreaking research and innovation. He also supports NC State by sitting on numerous boards, including the NCAA, where he sits on the D1 Board of Directors, the Subcommittee on Congressional Engagement and Action, and is chair of the Board of Directors Finance Committee. So he does a lot, and please welcome me in joining Chancellor Woodson.
Well, where did you find all that? Good evening, everyone, and students. Welcome back from spring break. I know this is exciting for you to get back going. It's good to have you all here, Charlie. You should be smiling when you say that. Yeah, I am smiling. So I want to thank the School of Public and International Affairs and the Institute for Emerging Issues for sponsoring this conversation tonight. As a land-grant institution and a public institution, we're constantly trying to navigate the issues of our day and the political issues of our day. I tell people my job is more like a mayor than a CEO. because I have a lot of constituents. They all want the best for the university, but unfortunately, they don't all agree what's best for the university or how to achieve it. And we're going to hear a lot about how to navigate the political divide tonight. Our moderator this evening is Dr. Trace Reed. Dr. Reed is an associate professor in the Department of Political Science and in the School of Public and International Affairs, where she serves as Director of Leadership in the Public Sector Program. She's had a long tenure of the department, including 6 years as chair of the department, and served as interim director for a number of roles in SPIA, but including working in the Institute for Nonprofits. You're in for a treat tonight because we have the governor, the former governor of Massachusetts, Charlie Baker, the Honorable Charlie Baker. And I've gotten to know Charlie. I'm not going to go too deep here, but I've gotten I've gotten to know Charlie through his role now as the president of the NCAA. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But he served as governor of Massachusetts for 8 years. And probably, I know, because I've seen the data, one of the most highly regarded and most impactful governors in our country, serving as a Republican in a fairly Democratic state, but yet very impactful in his work in historic investments in K through 12 education, increased support for vocational and technical schools. He expanded early college opportunities for high school students. He prioritized fighting the opioid and heroin challenges in the state. We have our own challenges in that space here. And he led Massachusetts through the pandemic. And if that wasn't enough, he decided to go lead the organization that probably is in one of the most challenging times in its history in the NCAA. And he may say a little bit about that. But prior to his election as governor, Governor Baker served as the CEO of Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare and served twice as a Commonwealth of Massachusetts Cabinet Cabinet Secretary, leading the Executive Office of Health and Human Services. As I said, as of March 1st, Charlie has been the current president of the NCAA and trying to pull us out of the morass that is college athletics these days. And with that, I'll let him talk more about it. Steve Kadish is also here with the governor, and he was Governor Charlie Baker's chief of staff, where his particular focus was tracking the most urgent policy and operational problems and building organizational capacity to do so. He recently stepped down after 5 years as senior research fellow at Harvard Kennedy School, Taubman Center for State and Local Government. Steve has numerous senior leadership positions, both in higher education and healthcare, including Northeastern University, Dartmouth College, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, and Brigham and Women's Hospital. He served as a Massachusetts Undersecretary for Health and Human Services and the Massachusetts Assistant Secretary for Administration and Finance and Assistant Commissioner for Operations at Massachusetts Division of Medical Assistance, or Medicaid. He's also worked as an advisor and consultant to the World Bank and World Health Organization. So please join me in welcoming our guest to NC State. It's all for you, Trace.
Can everyone hear me? I guess so. Okay. Well, I just want to join everyone in thanking both of you for coming here this afternoon and sharing your ideas and your insights and experiences. And I know you could be just about any place you want to be in the world, and we just so appreciate you coming here to have this conversation with us here at NC State. Now, I want to start our conversation because you wrote a really fascinating book, and I'll hold it up like they do on TV. And just to start talking about exactly, why did you guys decide to write a book like this? Now, generally, as you all know, when a person in your position, Governor Baker, when he or she leaves office, they tend to write a memoir. Steve, the chief of staff, you tend to write a tell-all book where you expose the seamy underside of how the government works. But you commendably chose not to take that route. So could you guys just talk a little bit about why did you decide to write a book like this? And in writing this book, who was your intended audience?
So Steve and I have worked off and on in the public and private sector together for 30 years. We first met when he was already in state government, and I joined state government when Bill Weld got elected in 1990. And over that very long period of time, where we worked together for 8 years in state government and then 10 years at Harvard Pilgrim, and then 4 years. How long did you, was it 3 years? Really? That's, you're chief for only 3 years? Well, but then you did a lot of work during the pandemic, so we'll call it 4, just for fun. I mean, we sort of developed a mindset and an approach to the way we work together. And just so you know, he is a Democrat. I am a Republican. He voted in the Democratic primary when I was on the ballot in the Republican primary. I couldn't even get his vote then. And it was weird for someone to choose somebody who wasn't involved in their campaign, much less was from the other party, to serve in the most important job in their administration. But I know Steve, and I know he gets things done. And I wanted somebody like that in that role. And I think for both of us, the public sector has been a big part of our lives, in state government and local government in particular. And the narrative generally about the public sector, for a whole bunch of reasons we can talk about if you want, is just rough. And this book is designed to do two things. Number one, to give people who are interested in the work, whether they're academicians or activists or people who work in public life or whatever they might be, a set of tools that they can use that are pretty applicable to almost any kind of problem or project you're trying to solve for. And the second thing was to actually point out that there are a lot of times in public life and in the public sector where good things do happen and where good work does get done. So it's a little bit of a pat in the back and a little bit of a, hey, hoorah. And I think we need more of that, to tell you the truth. The cynicism out there, which I think sometimes is justified and a lot of times is overblown, is very dangerous for democracy generally. And the final thing I'll say about who the audience is, I really do think of the audience as being the people who work in the public sector, the people who are interested in it, and the people who cover it, write about it, study it. I mean, I didn't think of this as like a barn burner, and the idea of writing a memoir. My friend Tony will let you know there's no more boring person on planet Earth than me. My memoir will be about 6 pages long, and there's no there. So, and we had a really good team. There's really not a lot of tell-all either. So the one place where we thought we had something to say was government does work, and if you're interested in it, here's a bunch of thoughts and ideas about how you can make it work too.
Okay. Steve?
Well, first, thank you, and thank you for doing this, and thank you all for having us. It's really,
Yeah, what he said, I forgot that.
It's really
I was so focused on the question.
it's an honor and a privilege to be here. So you say we could be in a lot of other places, but we're really happy to be here. So thank you.
Thank you.
We, as much younger people, were both very interested in solving problems. And I remember literally trading books, Larry Basavi's Execution, trading articles about how to get things done. And all of these good books that were helpful were business books. And generally they were private sector books, not even directly relevant to the nonprofit sector. And so all the stuff that we were reading about and trading books and articles about required a translation to the public sector. And so that stuck with me, and I remember talking with the governor about that. And so when the governor took office and we had a chance to begin to implement, so much of what we were doing was about the how, about there are good, smart people that could figure out some of the what and help figuring out the why. But how do you move ideas from ideas to the actual delivery of services was the thing that I really feel like that we brought and we're discussing here in the book. And so for me, the book is about a book about how. And it's also a book about hope. And during the middle of the writing of this, which took an awfully long time.
5 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we're rookies.
The January 6th riot occurred in Washington, D.C. And we literally had a conversation to say, did we put our pens and pencils down? Because what we're talking about is, mundane compared to the national crisis. And we both said, you know what? The idea of a government that works is in its own way this contract of faith with the citizenry about the importance of public service and government. So it's a book about how, it's a book about hope. And it's a book written by people who have been public sector leaders and managers for public sector leaders and managers about public sector services. And so I don't know that it's unique, but that's why we wrote it, and that's who the audience is about.
Yeah, and in fact, in the epilogue, you guys make a quite eloquent argument connecting the performance of efficient governmental public service and problem solving as being one of the strengths of democracy. And could you just elaborate on that just a little bit more in terms of how do you see that connection between making sure that government sort of does its job in protecting and providing public services and problem solving, and how that builds up the fabric of democracy?
Well, most of the stuff that gets done, particularly at the state and local level, is service related. And I think the epilogue talks about the fact that there have been studies that have been done that say that, people don't really look at a lot of that stuff through a political lens. They look at it through a more practical lens, which does it work or doesn't it? And the point we tried to make in the epilogue generally was when people experience a positive experience with whatever their particular connection to government is, it matters to them, and it doesn't really have a RD red blue label on it. It's just it worked, and there's a certain satisfaction and sort of implicit support for what it's all about that comes with that. And a couple of the stories in the book, one of them talks about putting broadband into 53 communities in Western Mass that didn't have it when we took office. And they didn't have it for a whole bunch of reasons, but most of them were a failure of government. They were never going to be places that were going to get it through the market, because, if you have to put 4,000 poles up in a community that has 2,000 people and covers 100 square miles, it's just, there's no math there that works. And there's no playbook on how to do that. And so, but those people deserve what is the equivalent of running water and heat and electricity the same way everybody else does. So we put together a plan, we got the right people in place, and then we pounded away at this thing literally and physically until we got it done. And it was a game changer and a life changer for the people that lived in those communities. And And honestly, they could care less about whether the administration that did this was Republican or Democrat, or the legislature that voted for the money to do it was Democrat or Republican, or whether or not the local officials or anybody else who was involved was whatever. I mean, all they knew was after years and years and years of banging their head against the wall and getting nowhere, they finally had something that made it possible for their communities to be successful in the 21st century. And in some of these communities, literally, the stories we got told were breathtaking. And in some of them, people literally said, there hasn't been a baby born in our community in 10 years. And last year, we had 4 new babies born. People moved into our community. People could actually sell a house and move out because all of a sudden we had the one thing that everybody else has, which is the access to the internet 24/7 in a way that people need. I mean, think about trying to go through the pandemic without that. So I think one of the things that gets lost in the yelling and screaming that goes on between the edges, mostly on social media and in regular media and on cable TV, is that's not where most people live. Most people live in a much more practical and pragmatic world. And if government delivers on the things that it's supposed to deliver on, or sometimes maybe even surprises people by delivering in a way that goes beyond what they would have expected, it's good for democracy, irrespective of whatever your particular political position is.
Yeah, and I want to kind of switch gears a little bit and further the conversation that you're making to look at how you were thinking about in the early days of your administration, structuring your administration in a way that was geared toward providing that kind of effective and efficient delivery of public service and problem solving. And one of the 2 things that sort of struck me about the way you were putting together your office was the inclusion of 2 new offices. Normally when people come into government, they always talk about we need to cut programs and cut staff and the like, but I was intrigued by the creation of this Office of Access and Opportunity, as well as creating that strategic operations team, which show up at different points in the case studies as a value added when you need that additional push to push the problem to be solved. So could you talk about where did that come from and why those 2 offices?
So I'm gonna let Steve talk about those 2 offices, but I'm gonna do a little table setting. We had a cabinet meeting every Friday at 10 o'clock. It was from 10 to 12. It was in person. You had to be there. Everybody in the cabinet had my cell phone number, and they had the lieutenant governor's cell phone number. They had Steve's number. They had other people's numbers. We tried very hard to basically live with the idea that no one is ever going to be surprised about anything because you can call any of us about anything anytime. The place where governments really get in trouble is when people start to think that their part of government is more important than somebody else's, or that people need to work through a chain of command that has 65 steps in it. And, we had regular morning meetings, regular cabinet meetings, regular meetings on hot issues. And the whole thing was about, we are a team, 100% team. Everybody's on the same team. The boat sinks and sails together. There's no such thing as you're great and you're bad. We are all in this. And many of the issues you deal with run across departments. We created a workforce skills cabinet because labor and workforce development, education, and economic development actually have a lot of shared interests with respect to the quality of our labor force and the opportunities to work. And a lot of these things had never been done before. And along the way, we also created those 2 offices to bake them into the way we did our work generally, with this idea that we are all part of the same team.
So the 2 offices, they both reported directly to me, as the chief of staff. The Office of Access and Opportunity was a important statement and function it had two purposes. One was to include the broadest possible members of our community into state government as employees. And the second was to, as broad as possible, expand who actually had contracts with the state. And so it was a diversity, it was economics, it was tapping on the wealth of the brilliance of all the members of our community at the governor's office level. And that team had access to the full cabinet and would periodically meet with the full cabinet and the governor on these two issues. The second was, think about it as a public consulting group inside the governor's office, a McKinsey inside the governor's office. I had spent a lot of time working with organizations, and in fact, one of the first people that joined our strategic operations team was from the Boston office of Public Consulting Group. So the idea of this was to have a half dozen, 8 people who were brilliant at helping to get things done, were brilliant value add, were immediate helps to leaders of agencies to actually address their problems. Having worked in state government before, I used to hate both when the governor's office called, because it was always a scold, and it was get this done
Usually an
tomorrow.
uninformed school too.
Awful. Or you needed to approach the governor's office to get them to do something, and they sat on their hands. So I wanted to create this idea of a governor's office that actually provided value add to the cabinets and the agencies to get the work done. So the idea of this small team, we would have conversations about where would you want to deploy this? Is it at the transportation issue? Is it on the rural internet issue? Is it on child welfare? And so 2, 3, 4 people would literally be deployed to act as a force multiplier, not from the governor's office to scold, not to the governor's office to blame, but from the governor's office to actually provide value add, this novel idea.
Can I read something about this?
Sure.
Administration officials have even turned Kadish's name into a verb that describes the dissecting of a problem and the development of a roadmap to turn things around. Quote, when an operation in government fails, Steve comes to you and you get Kadished, said Jay Ash, Secretary of Housing and Economic Development. Having Kadish parachute into your department is the right combination of unsettling and motivating, but the kind of creative tension Baker seems to be looking for, Ash said. That, Steve spent, I talk about all the time that the Lieutenant Governor and I spend running around the Commonwealth, getting to know municipal officials, making sure they knew us, knowing exactly what they were interested in doing, how our programs fit and didn't with what they did. This guy spent as much time out of our office in the State House and out in the agencies working on these projects. And you can't undervalue this whole notion of the typical relationship between the governor's office and the operating parts of government. The governor's office, as a general rule, is usually viewed as a problem, not a help. Because more often than not, they won't take the time to learn what is actually underneath whatever the problem is that's trying to be addressed. And they do have a tendency to come in like they got all the answers when in many cases they don't. And there's a certain humility that comes with him and the people who are part of his team that made it possible for people to embrace this idea. And we got to the point eventually in our administration where people would call the governor's office and ask for help. Now that is like unheard of.
Yeah.
When usually the so-called permanent infrastructure, the last thing they ever do is ask the governor's office for help. But people would see that this work actually wasn't political and it wasn't designed just to protect the backside of the politician. It was designed to actually solve the problem that we were dealing with. And people eventually started calling and saying, can we get some of those folks over here to help us with this thing? And again, some of that's also just about the whole idea of we're one team.
Right.
And there's a certain amount of trust that eventually developed with respect to that over time.
That's great. Yeah, I was really struck by that whole concept in terms of that value added, building capacity without putting all the work on already overworked staff. I thought that was just an excellent idea. But let's talk a little bit about the book. That's why we're here, right? Let's talk about what this book teaches us with regard to effective administration. And really, in reading the book, and it reads very nicely. It's not like a page turner, but
No, it's not. Yeah.
but it really does give you a really good sense of being there when you're addressing all of these problems. And it gives you a really good understanding of the complexities of the way in which government problem solving and service delivery works. But the results framework, I think, is worth talking about for those of us who haven't had the pleasure of reading the book. And it's really a framework for effective administration. And it's very straightforward, which is really good. But the beauty of it is that it's sufficiently nimble and adaptive so that it can respond to the complexities as well as the unpredictability of public problems. Because problems that you guys and public officials have to address, they're not easy. If they'd been easy, they would have been resolved many years ago. And oftentimes, something like COVID or what happened in the child welfare area, they come out of the blue, and you have to be able to respond quickly. The results approach or framework, I kept using those two terms, so really consists of four main pillars. And they are, people are policy, follow the facts, focus on the how, and push for results, okay? They seem pretty straightforward, but there's a lot more involved in that. And could you guys just help flesh this out a little bit so that we all can have kind of a better understanding of what those four principles or pillars represent?
When I take the first two, you can take the last two. The people or policy thing is just a basic notion that if you believe you can have the wrong person in the wrong job and that it's all going to work out, you're probably not going to be, you're going to be disappointed because in many cases, the most important thing leaders do is choose the people on their team. And the most important thing you need to do when you make those decisions is recognize and understand that they will ultimately, in many cases, determine whether or not you succeed. My father used to tell me when I was a kid that people get fired by their subordinates and their peers long before they get fired by their bosses. And that was his way of saying to me, recognize and understand that you're always sitting on somebody else's shoulders. And we tried very hard when we were putting together our administration to find people who were subject matter experts in their field, but we also wanted them to have some management experience, or if they didn't have management experience, we needed to pair them with someone who did, so that there would be management experience in the office. And if they weren't a great communicator, then we needed to find somebody who could be the communicator for them. And this idea is you try and build teams that have what I would describe as a set of skills and capabilities that can work well together. And the other thing is, no jerks. It says it right in the book. If you want to work on our administration, you needed to come in with an appreciation for the fact that you are part of a team, and you will be treated as a valued member of that team, but you need to treat the team the same way we plan to treat you. And I think in many ways, we were pretty lucky on this stuff. We made a few hires that didn't work out, but generally speaking, they for the most part did work out. And one thing I would say about this is when they didn't work out, we found a graceful way to create a path out. And guess what? Other people on the team notice that when you don't publicly humiliate somebody just because they were the wrong person in the wrong spot at the wrong time. With respect to follow the facts, I'll just say this. There's lots of reports and there are lots of, spreadsheets and lots of other ways that people gather data and information. But those facts and those reports are useful, but it's also important to pay attention to what we call the points of pain, which are in some cases indicators that there's something else going on. And I'll give you a really simple example. The Department of Children and Families, we knew had a whole bunch of issues when we took office. And there was this constant message that was coming from the social worker union that their members were wildly overworked and had too many cases, and trouble was going to happen or was going to continue to happen if we didn't deal with that. Now, if you looked at the average number of cases per social worker, it was 18, which was the number that was marked in the contract as being, the proper number. Now, so that's the fact, right? 18 cases per worker, and that was the number that we were supposed to try to hit. Now that presumes that your distribution looks like this, right? Now what happens if the distribution actually looks like this? So you have a whole bunch of people who have 8 or 9 cases, and then a whole bunch of people who have 23, 24, 25, 30 cases. So we looked at that average, but the noise we were hearing, the points of pain we were hearing, was that this wasn't an accurate representation of what was going on in the field. So we actually told every office, all 24 of them, tell us how many cases each one of your social workers has, right? And we ended up with a whole bunch that were over 20 and a whole bunch that were under 10. And that was there's a whole bunch of reasons for that, which I won't go into. But the bottom line was the 18 was a mirage with respect to what was actually going on. So then the big message for us became, okay, we need to do something about these people who have these tails, who have these huge number of cases. It's too many. We need to help them get back to where they need to be. And by doing that, we actually dealt with the big risk that was sitting there, which was social workers carrying too many cases, juggling too many balls, missing something, and something bad happened. We also had, I think half of our social workers were licensed.
We're what? I'm sorry.
Licensed.
Okay.
So we basically said, we're going to license everybody. And if you can't get licensed because you can't pass the test, we created a new role called social work techs, who basically became people who did a lot of the administrative and logistical work for social workers so they could focus on social work. And over in a couple of years, we were 90% plus licensed, and a whole bunch of people who couldn't get licensed were now providing support services to those that were. But the point here is that when you follow facts, there's two things. There's like the printed stuff and the metrics people track, but you gotta follow the points of pain, because sometimes the things people track aren't actually gonna tell you what you need to know about where your problem is. So that's people with policy and follow facts.
So, and thank you for saying all 4 out loud. So the next 2 pieces, focus on how and push for results. Focus on how includes 2 parts, the what to do and the how to do it. And from a time, resource, energy, thinking perspective, that's where the majority of the effort needs to go to move move something from understanding the problem, the facts, to the actual result. So what to do is what you think it is. It's the description of the activities that, if in place, will resolve the problem. It could be a budget, it could be an ordinance, it could be a law, a program description, a report. It's the charter of activities. It's the implicit promise that if the what gets done, the problem will be resolved. The how to do it is this relentless, intentional commitment to a method to actually getting it done. It's the, it could be lean, it could be Six Sigma, it could be project management. We like Agile, Scrum, all these buzzwords for different kinds of project management methods. But it is the idea that you have a method to organize the work, to organize the people, to organize the money, to organize the resources. And, in our experience, you could have money, you could have people, you could have the end idea. And this is so true with the rural broadband. They had $50 million, they had a whole organization, and they knew what the end result was. And after 10 years, they hadn't lit up any community. 10 years. It wasn't like 3 years. It was 10 years.
Which reminds me of Jack Welch's favorite comment. Don't confuse action with.
No, John Wooden.
John Wooden.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what is it?
Don't confuse activity with achievement.
Right. We had lots of activity, no achievement. Yeah.
And so, so the importance of the how is to have not just good intention, the resources, the people, et cetera, but is to have a method to do so. Push for results.
Okay, before he hops off the message, just one quick little asterisk. Steve, one of his earliest jobs was he was a construction manager. One of the things you learn when you're in the construction business is you create all these Gantt charts, right? And this thing has to happen before you can pour the cement, and pouring the cement has to happen before you can do this, and has to happen before you can do this and this. And so when we worked together at Harvard Pilgrim, Harvard Pilgrim had this project management system where everything was a green, but they hadn't finished a project in like 20 years. So
Say what Harvard Pilgrim is.
that was the health plan that we both went to work on that went into bankruptcy shortly before we got there, and we dug it out, and it was the #1 ranked health plan in the country for member satisfaction and clinical effectiveness for the last 7 years that we were there. So we would look at this project management thing and we would say, you guys haven't finished any of your projects, but they're all green. And they would say, yeah, we get together every couple of weeks and people talk about where they were. And it turns out that the deadline that they had here, they're going to miss. So we just moved the deadline. And we said, well, that won't work because all these things are interdependencies, right? And so what you need to do is if a project's red, you need to acknowledge it's red, or if it's yellow, you need to acknowledge it's yellow, and then do something about it because there are other people who are depending on you to get your thing done on time so that they can do their thing. And Steve brought that whole concept, and you meet regularly, everybody has to update everybody on where they are and all their stuff, and he brought that into, that's a huge part of the how is coming up with the way you're actually going to keep score. And these guys just did a beautiful job time and time again of coming up with a scoreboard that actually held people accountable to reasonable and realistic deliverables, but held them accountable. And it had, these benchmarks in it where, if you're not here, then you're not going to get here by now. And that's going to be a problem for this, this, and this. So we need to focus on how we get you to where you need to go by here. And that is, first of all, it's hard work. It's a real grind. And secondly, it requires, sort of the proverbial iron fist with the velvet glove. And these guys were really, really good at that. And once you get used to the idea of the discipline that comes with it, it actually is kind of a reassuring way of operating because you know where you are. It's like your control panel in front of you in the airplane is telling you all the things you need to know so you don't fly into the building.
It needs a CEO who buys into it. So, because otherwise a project management effort on its own is okay, but it needs a leadership to buy into it, which gets me to push for results. So we did people are policy, follow the facts, focus on how, and push for results. The ways that we measure the results is through project status, Green means that the deliverable is going to be met by the date. Yellow means that the team is saying that there are some issues, but they think they'll hit the deliverable date. Red is not bad. Red is actually the call for help. And it is really hard for people who like to get A's and like to get top recognition to put a yellow or a red on their project in front of the leadership team. So to be able to create an environment where folks, I don't want to say feel comfortable, but know that they're going to be treated fairly. Not if you have everything green, but if you actually have the objectivity to say, this one's yellow, we think we can handle it. This one's red, and for these reasons, we need help. And so the project status was one way we measure results, and the other are actually using performance metrics. And performance metrics are not new to public sector, private sector, but specific performance metrics using them in the public sector are hard to define, hard to get right, and hard to consistently use. And we use them in our healthcare work. And I'm looking at you two guys, because Sarah, because you both have mentioned the child welfare chapter in here, which was here we use this methodology, used metrics, used red, yellow, green for an agency that is run by social workers and is filled by social workers. They're not engineers. Social workers love to process things, but here this process is such that they embraced it, and it really allowed for the turnaround of the agency.
They also had a ton, I mean, we also had the union at the table that represented all the social workers who were part of this. The reason I took my phone out, and I apologize, when you were talking about the fact that red is okay, it's a call for help, you know, Teddy Roosevelt, who has a lot to do with the creation of the NCAA, gave a speech one time about the critic, right? And there's a line in it where he says, the credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcomings, but who does actually strive to do the deeds. I mean, this is one of the hardest parts about being in public life. And this is where I think leadership matters, you know. We would change course if we felt like we were going in the wrong direction on something, and we would say it, right? And that would then elicit all kinds of yelling and screaming about how we were changing course, and we must have failed and done something stupid. And, you know, sometimes maybe we did, but we were the doer of deeds. We were striving valiantly. And there is no aspirational effort in change management of big, complicated organizations that goes exactly according to plan. And what people worry about is that they'll get thrown under the bus the first time something doesn't go according to plan. And we both went to a going away party for somebody who served in our administration a few weeks ago. And one of the people who spoke there was a member of the legislature who had a pretty prickly relationship with our administration. And she started off her remarks by saying she wanted to thank Governor Baker. And everybody laughed hysterically because they thought she was kidding. And she said, no, I actually meant that. She said, there's no press here, so it's okay. And she said, I want to thank him for hiring this person. I want to thank him for letting this person be who they were. And I want to thank him for having her back. Yeah. And I think, you know, there is no straight line on doing a big, ambitious, complicated thing. And talk about things that sometimes the private sector doesn't understand about the public sector. In the private sector, you can play that hand, you can make adjustments, you can make changes, and you never bear the wrath, which is fine with me, I suppose, because you're a private sector entity, of you know, public humiliation. It doesn't work that way in the public sector. You know, you chase something and you make a mistake, you fall down, whatever it might be, man, they come after you and they come after you hard. And we tried not to be the administration that took that out on the people who were striving. We tried to make the adjustments, make the changes, and fix it.
This is a great conversation. I see I've been sort of prompted that we're running short of time, but I want to ask, you know, two questions, just to kind of shift gears again, okay? You're in a new role, or heading to a new role as president of the NCAA, right? And I was wondering, you know, do you envision the results framework being used in order to address the kinds of issues that that organization is facing now?
Sure. There's a lot of elements of the framework that you can use in a lot. I mean, I think you can use it in kind of any organization, and some of it I think is it's not quite what I would call common sense, because I think some of it's uncommon, but I think it's I totally believe that the framework itself can be a tool that people can use to work their way through all kinds of challenges and problems, and especially through projects. And change management, generally speaking, is usually a big collection of projects. And it's also a way to get buy-in, you know. It does create as Steve said, kind of a framework for how to think about things.
You want to talk about any of those issues?
Well, I've been in the job for 2.5 weeks, so I think there's a lot to do there. I will say this, that we are going to do and we'll get some outside help for this, what I call a SWOT analysis. Strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, which I think every organization should do one of those every 2 or 3 years, just to make sure you're not missing something, because it does force some awkward conversations and all the rest. And we are very much in the process of doing one of those. And I would think coming out of that, some of the stuff that's in here could be pretty helpful.
That's great. And here's the last question. A lot of young people are really interested in serving the public, yet they're not interested in participating in public service, particularly that being offered by the government. What can you tell young people, some of whom may be sitting out here today, that at least will allow them to consider careers in governmental service as an option?
So you want to go first or second?
I'll go first, because I think I want people to have the final word on this. So
how many people here are interested in public service as part of their career? Awesome. Okay. Then we're done.
Okay, let's go.
Don't blow it.
I was interested.
Exactly, right. That's what I'm worried about.
I'm going to start this idea, and Governor Baker's going to pick it up. But I've worked both in the public sector and the private sector, and I started off in the public sector at a low level, and the public sector is public service, and there's something I'm going to get. There's something I'm going to get schmaltzy. There's something noble about service. There's something noble about wanting to help the others in your community, especially those that don't have the same abilities, same resources, et cetera. And the opportunity to do that on a one-on-one scale is helpful, on a local scale is helpful, for me, and I think for Governor Baker, at a statewide level is profound in terms of the opportunity and the responsibility, the opportunity to help and the responsibility to not blow it, right? And so, I won't say it's a calling, but there is something noble and, you know, super humanly connectivity about, I want to not call it the public sector, I want to call it public service. And the idea of this, that it's service is really important.
So I think I've worked in the private sector, I've worked in the nonprofit sector, I've worked in the public sector, and I found joy and a sense of accomplishment in all of them. When Steve and I worked at Harvard Pilgrim, which really was on the verge of bankruptcy, which probably, if they had gone down, it probably would have taken 5 or 6 hospitals in Massachusetts down with them. It was very much a public service exercise. It was just a private sector business that had completely lost its way. And we had like 100% latitude with respect to structure, team, strategy, the whole thing. And we literally took it from dead to very vibrant and very alive. And it was a heck of a story, and I was thrilled to be a part of it. And I'll never forget it. The difference between that and public sector, so not serving the public, but public sector, is the degree to which the public sector creates just astonishing opportunities for input and opinion and life stories that is just way beyond anything you'd ever see in your traditional world. I'd worked in 2 administrations. I was Secretary of Administration and Finance, which is the biggest job in state government. I was the Secretary of Health and Human Services, which is the 2nd biggest job in state government. I ran a 1 million member health plan, $2 billion. I thought I knew a lot about Massachusetts and about people's stories and people's lives and all the rest. And then I ran for governor 3 times, right? I ran once and lost. That is a truly publicly humiliating experience. I just straight up. Ran again and won by the smallest margin in state history, okay? And then ran a 3rd time and won by the biggest margin in state history. And the stuff you learn when you're a candidate and when you have the job, what people will tell you because they've seen you on TV and you've been to their communities and they feel like they know you like their neighbor, they will tell you everything. And what you learn about the way people live and how they think and how they work and what matters to them, it's a growth opportunity like no other. There is simply no growth opportunity that can come close to the life experiences and the people you will come in contact with if you spend time in the public sector, because you're required to. That's who you're serving, is the people of your community, your state, whatever it might be. And as bloody and as ugly as the Harvard Pilgrim thing got, and as awesome as it was when we finally figured it out and made the machine run, and I love the people we worked with there. If you were to say to my wife, how many times did Charlie cry when he was at Harvard Pilgrim? And I think the answer would be pretty much never, all right? If you were to ask her how many times I cried when I was governor, it'd be like every day. And And the reason for that is the work moves you in a way that just goes way beyond what you could ever possibly imagine any other walk of life could deliver. And I know why a lot of young people want to do service and don't want to do public service, because they have an idea and it's their idea and they want to run with their idea. And that's great. And I hope they all build amazing nonprofits that do incredible work and solve all kinds of niche problems, right? And maybe even solve some big problems in a niche, right? But if you want the whole thing, if you want to get the real sense of what everybody out there is thinking and feeling about their world and their lives, and what their aspirations are and what they worry about and what they sweat about, the only place you're going to find it, honestly, is in some place in public service. Because that creates the familiarity and the possibility of conversation and sharing. I mean, so I wear a lot of bracelets for a lot of reasons, but this is an organization called Learn to Cope. I met these people. They were a ragtag little collection of moms and dads who'd lost family members to opioid overdoses when I ran for governor in 2014. Okay? And it was sort of like Alcoholics Anonymous for the parents of people who had family members who were dealing with addiction. And I went to some of their meetings. Oh my God, you know, first one I went to was in Cambridge. And a bunch of the people there, when they went around the room and introduced themselves, told me that the first meeting, even though they lived in Cambridge, the first Learn to Cope meeting they went to was somewhere else, because they were afraid they'd run into somebody they knew if they went to the one in Cambridge. And they saw people from Cambridge when they went to the other one, because other people in Cambridge didn't want to go to the one in their community. And I said, you guys are unbelievable. If I get elected governor, we're going to put one of these everywhere we possibly can in Massachusetts. And so that's what we did. We put one everywhere we possibly could. And then people would come, and I used to wear this bracelet, right? And people would come up and they would start telling me some story about some family member of theirs, start to cry. So I'd take my bracelet off, which has their website on it, and I would say, here, call these people. Go to their meetings, it will help. And I had so I asked Learn to Cope to give me 100 of them. And I gave these out all the time as people would tell me these stories, because I became completely connected to this issue through the work we were doing on it. And then one day, I'm racing to get to the car to go to whatever my next thing is, and I hear this woman calling my name from behind me. And just the way she was calling me, I was like, I could just get in the car, but maybe I should just be late to whatever my next thing is, because she sounds like she really needs to talk to me. So I stopped and I turned around. I said, what can I do for you? And she takes off her bracelet and she goes, you gave me this 3 years ago at the festival down here, because my son was in a terrible state. And you told me to go to one of their meetings. And I did. And then I went all the time. And those conversations helped me save my son's life. And he's doing much better, and he's got a job, and he's been sober for about a year. And she said, so I'm giving it back to you because it worked, and I want you to give it to somebody else. Now, I got 100 stories like that, which translate, sort of the black and white words in here, which we tried to put some feeling into, okay? But translates what public service and public life is really like into the flesh and blood that comes with it. And when you get it right, what it means for people. And I'm telling you, there's nothing else like it ever, anywhere. And I would urge all of you who have an even inkling of an issue to do this, to take a shot at it. And I promise you, as aggravating as this distributed decision-making model will be, and the fact that you won't get your own way every day and all the rest, you will have moments where you swear to God, you just lived through something that will change you in a very positive and important way.
Thank you. Thank you. So now are we opening up for questions? I keep looking at you, Erwin.
We've got like 5 minutes. I mean, you know, it's tough. It feels like Charlie hit the shot that kind of put the game out of reach. 10 to 15 seconds. But if anybody has a question, we've got time for 2 or 3 questions.
Yeah.
Someone just whispered. So as a registered Democrat, I'm wondering if you're planning on running for president, because I think that we could utilize more people in office who are open to this type of communication and dialogue across differences. Where do you think that's going to go in our state and national politics moving forward?
Well,
Who's listening to your message? Because
Yeah,
I think that's a really important message.
Well, I gave a talk at the Kennedy School about 10 days, maybe a week before the midterms. It was called the Godkin Lecture. They give it every year. It's named after the guy who was the first author, editor of the Nation, and which was actually the successor to the Liberator. And I talked in it about the fact that that I don't think America is where the media and a lot of the partisans in politics think America is. The media and the partisans think America is living on the edges. They're not. They're just not, okay? Most of the population is living somewhere in the middle. And that's borne out by the data. If you look at the registrations of unenrolled Democrats and Republicans for the last 25 years, the number of unenrolled is going up and the number of Democrats and Republicans is going down, to the point where we are soon going to have 50% of our electorate is going to be unenrolled. And in Massachusetts, 60% of the electorate is unenrolled. And that's because those people don't believe in, that I'm a checklist, right? I make up my own mind on issues based on facts, context, life experience, and whatever else. But they don't get anywhere near the same attention in the public that the edges get. And so you come away with this sense that America's all this way or all that way, when actually most of America is in here somewhere. And my concluding comment in my remarks was, and because of that, I think that the extreme candidates in both parties are going to lose next week. And that's exactly what happened. And my hope is that the people in public life figure out that the vast majority of America is not living here or here, they're here. And what they want is somebody to talk to them.
I serve on the city.
And for them.
I'm Steve Rao, I serve on the City Council of Morrisville, and I guess my question is for you, Governor, just following Roger's question. I think, first of all, I just am curious as to whether your experience as an administrator and an executive that was really able to bring in change at much larger roles helped you be an effective governor. Because sometimes what I see is people are just in political positions and they want to move from one to the next and then run for higher office, but they don't have the success of instituting change. When I read your resume, I was so impressed with how you were able to do this both at the cabinet level. So I'm just curious as to whether in your belief that helped you. I've seen that in my lifetime with, I went to Emory University like the professor, Professor Reed, but the best governor in West Virginia history was a guy named Gaston Caperton that had no political experience, but ran one of the largest insurance companies and came in and had a very similar track record like you and took West Virginia basically from the last all the way to the top of everything as a Democrat with Republican support. So I'm just curious as to where you stand on that.
I do think that, people forget that, governing, especially, state level, even municipal government at this point, it's a big management task and a big leadership exercise. The Commonwealth of Mass is a $45 billion operation with the executive branch's 44,000 employees, and it delivers all kinds of services to all kinds of people for all kinds of reasons and purposes. And then you have 351 cities and towns you work with, and I think management, as a general rule, doesn't get quite the the play that maybe it probably should. But it is a big enterprise, and understanding, how to find the right people, how to build the right teams, how to hold people accountable, how to create a rhythm in your organization so that people understand sort of what the process is going to be. Having somebody who can help you figure out how you're going to determine whether or not, in fact, you're actually getting what you're supposed to get out of what you're doing. Like who's flying your plane, and making sure your control panel is telling you what you need to know. Those are all things that in especially executive positions in government really matter, whether they're elected or appointed. And I certainly believe that in places and spaces where people have chosen to govern that way, they've been pretty effective, and people have appreciated it. Are your municipal elections nonpartisan?
They're supposed to be.
Yeah, is that right?
When I first got in 12 years ago, it was very nonpartisan. And now the parties come in and endorse the candidates. And so it's unfortunate because it's the last level of government where you wouldn't have partisanship. But it's because they say, well, your name of your party isn't on the ballot, but the parties are coming in and just bashing. Like in my last election, I've been the top vote getter in every election for 4 elections, which is in the city, there's a third Republican, Democrat, Independent. But in my last election, there were flyers saying, he's a bad person because he talks to Republicans, or don't vote for him because he's talking. I mean, it's like,
So what happened?
I won #1 again.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
Now I'm back to my earlier point, which is, most people want people to work together.
It just gets frustrating because of the noise.
No, believe me, I totally get
Both
that.
the social media.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, yeah. You of all people should check out that lecture I gave at Harvard, the Godkin lecture. You will find some of it very interesting.
Thank you.
Sarah gets to ask a question?
Yes.
Did we give Sarah permission to ask a
Oh,
question?
yeah, by all means.
This is going to be good. I'm just kidding. So we're on a college campus. We're a research university. We've got lots of brilliant academics who study this. I'm curious how you partnered with your university partners on some of these tough challenges. And
We stole their students. I'm not kidding.
Are y'all listening?
Right? A bunch of the people who worked in Steve's sort of innovations unit in the governor's office were fellows from a bunch of the government schools around Massachusetts. And they did unbelievably great work.
Yeah. They were brilliant, and they had great experience. We had very active partnerships as co-op students with some of the universities. Our state university system, there's an entity that was called Commonwealth Medicine that's out of the medical school that provided super services to help our health and human services agencies, also some of our public safety corrections agencies, with the delivery of services and some of the research.
How about during COVID, okay? We needed to go from doing like 3,000 tests a day to doing like 100,000 tests a day. There's a joint venture between Harvard and MIT called the Broad Institute, right? We went to them, and there's another company in Massachusetts called Thermo Fisher. Now, Thermo Fisher is a very big worldwide medical device and laboratory company. And they had these really high-powered processing machines, and they had a ton of reagents, okay? So they had like the raw material, but they couldn't actually, they would sell you that, but they couldn't actually do the testing. I needed somebody to do that. So I asked the Broad if they would be, able to do like 100,000 tests a day so that our colleges and universities could test their students and their staff, schools could test students and staff. People could we had a whole bunch of free testing sites set up around the Commonwealth. And in they said, sure. And in 2 weeks, right, we bought a bunch of gear from Thermo Fisher, and 2 weeks later, they were doing 50,000 tests a day. And, a month later, they were doing 100,000. Wow. And it gave everybody this sense of comfort and confidence that in most settings where it mattered, we had a testing infrastructure in place, just like that. And where'd it come from? It came from a joint venture. In fact, the only joint venture between Harvard and MIT. I mean, for the most part, what I really wanted from the colleges and universities, and we got it a lot of times when we asked for it, was capability. I wanted it, I mean, research, great, right? But what I really wanted was capability. And they did a lot of stuff for us. I mean, if I start thinking about this, almost all the stuff we did around advanced manufacturing and smart materials, that was all University of Lowell and MIT. I could go through a long list of the tell-all. I could go through a long list of sort of partnerships where, you know, we had a school that was really good at something and we said, we come up with a few bucks, can you help us sort of take that thing to the next level? It was great.
Well, please join me in thanking Professor Reed and Steve and the governor.
Thank you so much.
Governor and Steve will be available for signing books right now. Thank you all.